The NFL Combine is over, so it's time to get into the meat of mock draft season. I'm going to tell you how the NFL first round will go with a 100% hit rate, guaranteed. So the first pick to the Raiders, not very fun. You all know what's going to happen. Fernando Mendoza is the pick at number 1. You get your franchise quarterback. I'm not going to go too much in detail with Mendoza, but Raiders fans, if you really want to know what you're getting with Mendoza, I will be doing a full deep dive on QB prospects in the next couple weeks, and I'm going to be doing full dives into every position within the next couple weeks leading up to the draft. So if you really want to know my positional rankings, my breakdowns of these guys, their skill sets, their weaknesses, subscribe and hit the noti bell, because sometimes the YouTube algorithm doesn't actually show you who you subscribe. So if you really want to see my breakdown in these upcoming prospects, like I said, hit the noti bell after you subscribe to see those. So the Jets pick number 2, and this is honestly when the draft actually starts. And they have a ton of options here. With no quarterback to go, you're kind of looking at ramping up your defense, adding an additional wide receiver. And I don't think any of the receivers are the best here at number 2 overall. So we're going to go defense. And specifically, we're going to go an edge rusher, because the corners, I love them, but they're not number 2 overall worthy. So we're mostly looking at Ruben Bain, David Bailey, and Arvell Reese, linebacker turned edge rusher. I also think Sonny Styles is interesting here, but I'll talk about him in a little bit. Now, the Jets did just make a big trade, sending Jermaine Johnson over to the Titans for Sweat. So they ramped up that interior line. And you look at the defensive scheme of the Jets and Aaron Glenn, like all NFL teams at this point, they run a very multiple defense, but I do think, from what I heard, they're switching more to a 3-4 from their 4-3. And I think Ruben Bain, while he's my favorite edge rusher in this class, obviously there's some limitations with him that we'll talk about when we pick him, but I don't think he fits their scheme, their new scheme. And with the Sweat pickup, I don't think Ruben Bain's the pick. So we're looking at David Bailey or Arvell Reese. And I'm going to go Arvell Reese. I think the upside is higher than David Bailey. I definitely think David Bailey is a really explosive athlete, but I think Arvell Reese matches him in that athleticism. Reese is coming from a linebacker position, but he has really heavy hands. He can really set the edge well. So I don't think him switching to more of that outside linebacker, edge rusher position is a question mark. In worst case, if he can't, you can move him back to off-ball linebacker where he will exceed at. So picking an off-ball linebacker at number 2 seems kind of crazy, but he has that upside of an edge rusher. And I know the tweener picks are kind of scary sometimes, but I don't think he's the tweener where, like, if he doesn't play edge, he's just a nobody. I think he's a great prospect at either position. So Arvell Reese at number 2 to the Jets to ramp up that historically terrible defense. At number 3, you have the Cardinals, and I definitely think tackle, specifically Francis Monangai, is playable here. He's my favorite tackle of the group. Not a hot take. I think he's young. He is a little raw and he has some things to work on, but the upside is phenomenal. But I think they go defensive side of the ball, and they could use an edge rusher, right? Or an off-ball linebacker as well. Their interior defensive line is their strongest position, right? Not saying it couldn't use work either, but they have some guys there. They just drafted Walter Nolan, who he had a lot of injuries last year. I think that'll get better. None of the corners, like I mentioned with the Jets, are worth the top 3 pick to me. You can cross off McCoy and Delane right there. So you're looking at Bain, Downs, Styles, and Bailey. I don't think Downs is the play here. I think he's a phenomenal prospect. He's arguably the best prospect in this draft. I just don't know if you're drafting a safety at 3 overall, right? So Bain, Styles, and Bailey. And to be honest, I know this sounds crazy because of the positional value, but I'm going Sonny Styles. And I'm trying not to overreact to the combine. I had Styles as a top 5 prospect if you remove positional value before the combine. So the combine, as much of a freak of nature as he just showed off he is, the combine isn't why I have him at 3. I have him at 3 because I think worst case, you're getting a superstar at the linebacker position. And I know it's a position that you don't really need a superstar at, but it helps. Look at a Fred Warner. Look at the Eagles team that won the Super Bowl with Christian Bond, right? Having a superstar linebacker never hurts. And to be honest, I think Sonny Styles can transition to an edge with some time. But you don't need him to do it right away. The Cardinals have some pass rushers there. It's not a great pass rusher group, but it could be worse. So I think bringing in Styles as a linebacker and then maybe transitioning him to an edge is a very playable and high upside pick. Now, I'm sure Cardinals fans will kind of be nervous about that, seeing that they kind of did the tweener thing with Isaiah Simmons. Styles is way different. I know he used to play safety, but he transitioned to linebacker at Ohio State. He played it at a very high level. He continued to work with the Ohio defensive coordinator after Matt Patricia after the season ended, to work on film, to work on getting better, to prepare for the NFL. Styles is I think a generational linebacker talent that could switch to edge. I think Reese is different because he's a linebacker that will switch to edge, that could bounce back to linebacker, worst case scenario. I think Styles is a great linebacker that has the potential to be an edge as well. So Styles at number 3, probably the hottest take of this draft, but I think he is actually worth that upside right there. Then at number 4, we have the Titans, and they have a couple things that they want to work on. In a perfect world, I would build around Cam Ward. They need a receiver help. Obviously, they invested in some in the last year's draft with Alec Andamore, with DK. I like the receiver groups. They are lacking a true superstar though. So I think wide receiver is playable here. And I think fit-wise, Mekhi Lemon would be the best because I think they need a slot receiver. But I don't think Lemon is worth the number 4 pick. I think Jeremiah Love is honestly interesting here, replacing that running back position. But again, I think they have too many needs. I think on the offensive line, they have to figure out their long-term plan with JC Latham. He's not a terrible tackle, and it took him 2 years in the first round, but they need to decide, is he a tackle or is he guard? They could also think, hey, is Francis Monangai a guard? Because we don't know if he's a tackle yet. So if you are 100% into Latham moving to guard and you want Monangai to be your tackle, or vice versa, I don't mind the pick there. But I think that's too much of a question mark. So I think they go defensive line as well, and we're going to continue a run on defense, right? I think Ruben Bain is the pick here. Yes, his arms are short. Yes, the measurables are very questionable. He's an outlier. But if you watch him play, he substitutes those arms with his skill set. He's extremely strong. He closes in quick, almost like I saw the best comparison, almost like a Mike Tyson boxing match, where he kind of avoids the long arm punches by the tackles and he punishes you inside. His skill set is really, really good. The Titans are going to flip to more of a 4-3 scheme under Robert Saleh. I think he fits that perfectly, especially after the Sweat trade. I think he could play on that traditional defensive end 5 technique, or he can move into a 3-eye. I think he's movable around the line. Worst case, you move him inside, like I said. I think Ruben Bain's a great pick at number 4. Then at number 5, to me, you have 2 options. You either go to Caleb Downs or you go offensive line Francis Monangai. Now, wide receiver is an option as well because Neighbors had that big injury. Wanda Robinson's a free agent. And my biggest goal would be to support Jackson Dart's development. So to me, that's wide receiver or offensive line. And I think you can get a good enough wide receiver in the 2nd or 3rd round or in free agency versus a tackle, right? Now, before I move on, Downs is interesting because of Harbaugh. Harbaugh obviously saw how good of a SAR safety can play with Kyle Hamilton, but I think he wants to, well, we also know the Harbaughs love strong offensive lines. They want to be able to run the ball. They want to be able to win the trenches. So that, along with supporting Dart, to me, moves it away from Caleb Downs. But he definitely is an option here. So I have Francis Monangai as my number 1 tackle. Yes, there might be some questions if he needs to bounce into guard. Worst case, you get a franchise guard as well. But I think he's an offensive lineman that plays 10 years in this league as a starter. Maybe he doesn't become a superstar like a Penei Sewell, like a Tristan Wirfs. It happens, but I think you got a starter offensive line for this team for 10 years. I think Francis Monangai is the play for the Giants to bring a little more stability for Dart and Cam Scatterbo. Then at pick number 6, the Browns have 2 major needs. That's offensive line. And when I say offensive line, I mean the entire offensive line, because as you guys probably know, the entire offensive line is free agent. So every single starter could be replaced. And they also need a actual playmaker at wide receiver. Jerry Jeudy obviously is not it. Cedric Tillman has flashes, but those 2 aren't stopping you from drafting a wide receiver. Now, with Francis going the pick before them, he would have been an auto select for me because I think the Browns, with 2 first-round picks, they could either go tackle, tackle, or they could go tackle, receiver, wide receiver, tackle, right? Either way, you're getting an offensive lineman at one of those two picks. Honestly, the way I prefer to build a team, I would have gone tackle, tackle in a perfect scenario. But looking at who's available, Spencer Fano, I'm not a huge fan. I have him dropping, as you'll see. He needs to put on a lot more weight on his limbs. But the problem is, going from last year to this year, he put on weight, but it almost all went to his gut, which will happen. But it makes you kind of nervous that he's kind of maxed out building his frame along his limbs. And obviously with an NFL level strength and conditioning, it will get better. And he does not handle power rushers well at all at the moment. He is quick. He does have some good technique. He can handle speed rushers well, but power rushers kind of had their way with him. Not had their way. He still held his own, but it was his weakness. And he didn't really face any elite ones in the Big 12 either. I also think Monroe Freeling is very interesting that I'll get to later. But what I'm getting at is the tackles at number 6 are not worth it. So let's just go get our wide receiver 1. And I prefer Jordan Tyson. I think he's more talented. I think he's a superstar in the making, but being a little more predictive of what the Browns would do versus what I would do, I think they take Carnell Tate. Most people probably already know enough about Tate. You know, he's going to provide a reliable target. He's a good route runner. He's got good hands, very good down the field. I don't think he's ever going to be like a true elite number 1, but I think he could be a number 1 for a short stint, but overall be a great number 2. And that's not necessarily what you want at number 6, but you're just trying to add talent to this team. I give Shedeur Sanders a little more assistance, or give a little more to whoever the quarterback is next year. Carnell Tate at number 6. Then number 7, we have Washington, and they also have multiple places they could go. They could beef up the offensive line. They could bring in a guy like Jeremiah Love, which a lot of people like to mock. But if you were watching Washington last year, the offensive struggles weren't because of the running back room. I mean, I'm not saying the running back room was great, but I don't think that's the priority. To me, I'm going on defense, because if Jaden Daniels is healthy, the offense already gets a big boost. I do think they could use a wide receiver. Debo wasn't bad. McLaurin's awesome, but they're both getting older. And getting a receiver to be on the same timeline as Daniels is a very nice addition. But I do think they go defense, and I think David Bailey is the guy. I have question marks about David Bailey. He's a speed rusher, but I think his lateral mobility and his ability to make cuts and inside-outside moves, work on the tackle, is questionable. I think he just kind of won on pure speed, which won't happen in the NFL. And his run defense is a questionable mark, but I think a lot of people overhype that, because the last end of the season, he definitely got better with it, and he will continue to get better with it. But the upside of David Bailey is there. He might have the most upside of any of these edge rushers besides Arbor Reese that I talked about. I just think his question marks are bigger than Bain and even Reese. So that's why, in my opinion, he drops below those guys. But it doesn't drop much. David Bailey is a freak of nature. I think he's definitely worth a top 10 pick. And I'm not going to go too much into details about the actual like breakdown of these prospects with the strengths and the weakness. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video with Mendoza and these other prospects, I will break them down more in my specific position rankings and stuff like that. So again, watch out for those videos, subscribe and hit the noti bell if you want to watch those and really get a good grasp on this draft class, right? At number 8, we have the Saints, who I guess found their quarterback. Tyler Shuck looked really good that second half of the season, and their offense started to click and they started to win some games. A team that, for the most part, people thought were going to be a top 3 pick heading into this draft, ended up 8. So not, they didn't win a ton of games, but definitely an improvement. I think they have a couple options where they could go. I think bringing in a wide receiver to complement Chris Olave is definitely interesting. And I think Jordan Tyson would be a phenomenal addition. I just wonder if they look at Tyson and Olave, 2 players that have some question marks health-wise. Maybe you don't want to double down on that. I'm going to have Lemon dropping a little bit because I know he was awesome in college, but very high volume slot receiver who didn't have the metrics that you want to see. That to me is going to be someone that drops, right? Maybe a little bit of overinflation on how he did this year. So we're going to not look at receiver now. I definitely think interior offensive line needs boost, but I don't think you're going to pick them at 8. I honestly think you just go best player available, and it could be Downs, best player, but Jeremiah Love is arguably the best prospect in this draft if you remove positional value. And running back might be a little, rich for a team that has multiple needs, but you have your quarterback. You have a good receiver group overall. Not amazing, but good. I just think bringing in a running back to replace Kamara, you have him as a 1-2 duo with Devin Neal, more of like probably a 65% split Love's way. Just go get a superstar running back to support Shuck's development. I don't hate it. So Jeremiah Love going to the Saints. I actually like it a lot. Then at number 9, we have the Chiefs, who are finding themselves in a unique position picking inside the top 10 after such a nasty injury with Patrick Mahomes. I also think they have a lot of ways they could go. They could go offensive line because clearly they need to develop a stronger trenches to support the running game and protect Mahomes. I think they could go wide receiver, and Jordan Tyson is very, very intriguing to me right here because with the Rashee Rice problems, and then Xavier Worthy is a good, he's not a superstar, but he's a good player to have on your team because of his speed, but he's not going to be a number 1 receiver, and Travis Kelce retiring soon. I think Tyson is very intriguing here, but I think they go defensive line, and a guy who had a great Senior Bowl, who also had a great combine. Not that that's the reason I'm moving him up, but Caleb Banks from Florida has been really, really impressive. You know, he had an up and down season, some injury problems, some inconsistency that he needs to work on, but I think playing him on that defensive line alongside Chris Jones will create a wreck in the middle of the defensive line, right? I also think he could be a potential replacement for Chris Jones. Not that they play the position the same way, but Chris Jones isn't getting any younger. You got to have a disruptor up front. We've seen that in multiple Super Bowl champions now. And I think together they'll play really well, but even Chris Jones leaves, you have a kind of replacement for him. So Caleb Banks at the Chiefs to ramp up that defense at number 9. And then speaking at ramping up that defense, we have the Bengals, which is... This might be one of the easier picks outside of Mendoza for me because you would either go edge rusher, who they keep picking and swinging and missing on, or safety. I also think interior offensive line is possible here because you have to protect Burrow. If he keeps getting hurt, you're never going to go anywhere. But if your defense keeps playing how it is, you're also not going to go anywhere. And very few, I think they played better in the secondary, but they could still use some help. And I think Caleb Downs is a guy that arguably best player in the draft. He is just a genius out there. He's a 3-year starter. He was a starter for an Alabama defense with Nick Saban as a freshman. Led the Ohio State defense to one of the best defenses in the country back-to-back years. He takes away a lot of part of the field that offenses nowadays thrive in. So I think Downs is one of those guys where he actually can transform a defense that already has a couple good pieces just through his IQ and his natural ability to make plays. So Caleb Downs to the Bengals. I love that pick. Then at 11, we have the Dolphins, a team that they're going to try to get rid of Tua. They probably won't be able to because of this contract. A team that just kind of has needs all over the place, right? And in a way that is obviously miserable because your team just lacks talent. But you're also like, you know what? Let's just get the best player available. You know, let's just add talent. If I'm going to say best player available, I have a guy that, if injuries weren't a problem, could have gone as high as honestly like 4 or 5. I'm going to go Jordan Tyson. I think he's the best receiver in this class. The injuries are concerning, but I don't think they're injuries that necessarily will be repeatable all the time, right? Sometimes freak injuries happen, but they don't lead to future injuries. And if there's a receiver that I said, I'm going to bet money that he becomes a true number 1 in this league, Jordan Tyson would be that guy. So I think best player available for Dolphins. I also think they could be a trade back candidate, and I tried to make it happen, but I wasn't sure who would trade up with them. I think the Bucks could, I think the Lions could, Vikings could, but to me, those teams, it isn't quite worth going up there to trade back because if you're the Dolphins, I would just want more picks to get more players because you have so many needs. Let's just get them the best player available. Jordan Tyson to complement Jalen Waddle and make that wide receiver room whole again after losing Tyreek Hill. Then for the Cowboys, you're really hoping that one of those blue chip prospects that have some question marks, I guess they're not blue chip prospects, but one of those, a Caleb Downs, a David Bailey, a Ruben Bain, a Sonny Styles fall because of either positional value or question marks, because all those guys would be an auto click for the Cowboys. But because I don't think their question marks are as big of a deal as other people might, they're all gone for me. So, I'm looking at linebacker. CJ Allen's awesome, but I think 12 is a little early. I really love Dylan Thanelman, but again, a little early for him. So I'm looking at the corners because the corner room with Bland, he's good, but I don't trust him as a number 1. And Siobhan Ravel He struggled a lot last year. Now, he was coming off a major injury, but I don't think either of those guys are like, you know what? Let's not take a great corner, right? So I'm going to go corner for the Cowboys to try to solidify that defense, right? And Jared McCoy in 2024 was the best corner out of all these guys versus 2025, right? His 2024 tape is better than anyone's 2025 tape. But the injury concerns, I haven't seen anything that makes me think he's 100% good. No question marks regarding his injuries. And maybe we get to a point closer to the draft where we do get those reports. And then Jared McCoy here is amazing. And to be honest, if his health things are good, based on his 2024 tape, he could probably go as high as like 5 or even 4, the Titans. I think he's a top 8 pick worst case based on 2024. Because of the injuries, I'm going to have him dropping a little bit. So I'm going to go Mansour Delane. The only concern with him is he's like a 1-year superstar. He was good at Tech before he transferred, but he wasn't phenomenal. But last year, he looked incredible on a LSU defense that was incredible. So I think Delane becomes corner number 1 here because of McCoy's question marks, and he goes to the Cowboys. Then the Rams at 13. Now, the Rams don't need a ton of help because they're one of the best teams in the league, and they have the gift of the 13th overall pick because of a trade back last year. And Matthew Stafford is coming back, but this is probably going to be his last year. So quarterback is going to be a possibility here. And I know what a lot of people are probably thinking, draft a ready now player to help them win a Super Bowl this year, because you might not have another shot after Stafford leaves. And you can get 2 first-round picks because you have the 29th pick as well. Go get a stud. But like, you look at who's available. McCoy, we don't know. Allen is interesting to upgrade that linebacker position. He really is. Mestimore is interesting, but their pass rush was not a problem last year. I think their tackle position is actually a lot better than a lot of people think. I don't think you definitely look at all these players and you'll think, none of those guys move the needle for me this year. And next year, you're going to have a pick in the late 20s as well. And I don't think Ty Simpson makes it back to the 29. And I don't know if a really good quarterback makes it to the next year either. And Ty Simpson has a lot of question marks. That second half of the year was not good. But the first half of the year, he looked like QB1. His first half of the year was better than Mendoza's. I'm not taking him above Mendoza, of course. But the first half was better. And now you sit him for a year. You let him learn under Matthew Stafford and under Sean McVay. I honestly love Ty Simpson at 13. Is it a reach? Maybe. But the best teams look for the future. The best teams prepare. And I think Ty Simpson here makes a lot of sense for them to continue being one of the best teams in the league after Stafford's retirement. Ty Simpson at 13. Sorry. Now we have the Ravens, right? Definitely need some offensive line help. Definitely need a big X wide receiver, right? And if Tyson was here or Tate was here, honestly, it might be an auto smash for me, right? But they're not. Mekhi Lemon doesn't help them. And then if you look at the other receivers, a Boston, he's not worth that high, right? So to me, they only have a couple options, and that's either improving their pass rush or improving the offensive line so Lamar and Henry can be more efficient like they were the year before, right? I'm not a big fan of Messidor. I think he's a little overrated as a pass rusher. Now, he is very refined. He is one of the best day one pass rushers, but I don't think he's like an elite guy like a lot of people think. But I do think for a team that's trying to win now, he makes sense. And the Ravens desperately need a pass rusher. That said, knowing the Ravens front office, knowing how they usually go, I think they go offensive line. I have no idea how to say his name. I've heard it before. I should have wrote it down before I did this draft, but I didn't. So we're going to go to the guard out of Penn State, just so I don't botch his name. I think he's the best interior lineman in this field, especially guys who are already interior linemen. I think there's a couple of tackles that will kick in, but I don't even think they're better than him anyway. So Ravens boosted that offensive line up front. Then at pick number 15, we have the Buccaneers. And the guy I was just talking about, who I think is a little overrated, we're going to take him now. Mesidor, the Buccaneers have been desperate for a pass rush for years now. And every time they try to get one, it doesn't work out. The offense is good. They could use maybe a Sadiq, especially if Mike Evans leaves. They could use some offensive line. They could use a linebacker or corner. I think those are in play, McCoy and Allen. But I think a pass rush would transform their defense better than anything. So while I think he's a little overrated, Mesidor to the Bucs does make sense to me. He stays in Florida. Then for the Jets, we already picked Arvo Reese, their new future pass rusher, right? So now they have some options. They could go wide receiver. They could go interior defensive line, but they kind of already did that with the trade. or they could go cornerback, right? And I think that's where I go. The corner position after trading away Sauce is very lackluster. And while the injury concerns of McCoy are a big deal, I think you have a guy, like I said, could have been the pick like 4 through 8 if it was coming off of 2024. Taking him at 16, the upside is just too high to pass up. I think Jared McCoy would be a great addition to this Jets defense, assuming he doesn't have really bad medicals getting closer to the draft, right? Then you have the Lions at 17. They could use another corner, but to me, that's not as big of a need. I also think a linebacker is interesting. I also think an interior defensive lineman is possible. So Kendrick Folk is at play here. Howell's at play here, but I'm not as high on him. TJ Parker, Peter Woods. But I think they want to address the left side of the line a lot. Left tackle could be improved, but I don't think there's a starting left tackle here. Fano and Freeling I've already talked about. We'll get to them soon. But I don't think the Lions want one of them. I think the Lions are going to take Caden Proctor, tackle. He's going to play guard, okay? He's too heavy-footed to play tackle. He needs to get quicker for guard as well. He needs to lose some weight. Plays too heavy. But I think he can kick in and be a really good guard. Really strong, powerful. I think he'd fit this Lions team pretty well. So we're drafting Caden Proctor to be the new Lions starting guard, right? Then at number 18, I arguably have the easiest pick of the day. Now, the Vikings could grab RB2, and if Jeremiah Love somehow falls, which I do think is possible, he'd be a great pick here because they are a playoff team. Even though they didn't make the playoffs, they're a playoff caliber team. So grabbing a guy like Jeremiah Love is just wonderful. I like Price. I like Coleman. Mike Washington's interesting. But to be honest, this running back, none of these guys are like, oh, yeah, I got to grab one of these guys, I think this running back class is a little overrated. I think it's starting to get properly rated. I think people are coming down on it, but it was getting way too overhyped. I think safety is where they go here. I think Dylan Thieneman. Now, Brian Flores does not like to play rookies, but I think Thieneman is one of those kind of rookies that would start on this Vikings defense immediately. They need to add some help in that back secondary. Yeah, I think Dylan Thieneman is the kind of guy that could play day one, even for a guy like Brian Flores. Then with the Panthers, they could use some offensive line help for sure, but I don't think it's as dire need as just the overall defense needs help with, right? Some additional pass rushers. I also think a defensive lineman next to Derek Brown could be very useful. Linebackers also really interesting here. CJ Allen. Would be a great pickup for them. I love CJ Allen, and we'll talk about him in a second, but I think the linebacker group in this class is so good, and they have some other needs they could use. So I think they wait on linebacker, and they're going to go Kendrick Folk, right? Now, the thing with Folk is everyone knows the pass rush is it needs improvement, right? I do think if you watch the tape, he shows a lot more potential and explosiveness than you think. It didn't translate, and I always get nervous taking a guy at a position like that who didn't have any production. Shamar Stewart last year was just in the same boat. I think the nice thing about Folk is he has the upside as an edge rusher, but I also think if it doesn't work out, he just puts on a little more weight and he moves inside a little bit and plays that three technique a little bit or something like that, right? So in the Panthers need both. So again, I don't love drafting a tweener like that unless I think the downside version is still a really good player. And I think his run defense is so good that you got to stop the run in order to be relevant in the NFL, right? Because if you're giving up 5-6 yards per run on first and second down, the key is to get the third and long, right? And that's when the pass rush really takes its step up. So I think Kendrick Folk will solidify himself a long career in the NFL. The upside is the question mark, but I think the Panthers, in the worst case scenario, they'll be very happy with Folk, right? I like him. I think he's getting a little overhated now, right? So then the Cowboys pick again, and we're going to continue to add to the defense, but a little more forward. Now, the Cowboys could use an elite edge rusher, and I think if, like I said, they already passed on Mesidor earlier. I think that, I can't remember if I mentioned him for the Cowboys or just the Ravens, but I think he'd be in play for the Cowboys because I think they want to compete still, right? Dak's still not in his prime, but up there. They have two good receivers, assuming they bring Pickens back, which I think they will. But looking at the edge rushers here, Parker, I don't really love it, assuming they bring Kenny Clark back, their interior defensive line set, Zion Young I like, but I think they go linebacker. I think bringing in a guy like CJ Allen, a guy that Kirby Smart trusted more than anyone else on his defense, he was a stud for them. I think he can kind of do it all. He hits hard. He breaks in well on the runs. I think he solidifies that linebacker group, be the general on that defense, right? So CJ Allen at number 20, I think is a good fit for the Cowboys. And then you have the Steelers at 21. No quarterback on the board worth taking. That's another reason I had the Rams take Ty Simpson, because I think you see the Jets at 16. You see the Steelers at 21. And even the Browns at 24. I don't think they would have taken Simpson, but you can't rule it out. They could go tackle depending on how they feel about Broderick Jones at this point. As a Steelers fan, I don't love Broderick Jones, but he did show improvements this year. Corner is a possibility. James Pierce, a free agent. You need someone across Joey Porter Jr. Jalen Ramsey's getting old. Jalen Ramsey also played a lot of safety last year. And with his age and the lack of safety, Elliott's there, but he's not a guy that you don't draft a safety for. I think Emmanuel McNeil-Warren is a possibility, but I think they just go wide receiver. That room desperately needs help. DK Metcalf, one, is older, but two, he's the only main guy there. Calvin Austin I like, but he's not a guy that you don't draft a receiver for. He's also a free agent. Roman Wilson hasn't proved anything. And the rest of the wide receiver group should probably be entering a retirement home soon. So while I have question marks around Mekhi Lemon due to his size, his hand size, his metrics, he was very productive. And again, it might have been a volume thing, but I do think he's still worth a first round pick, just not as close to Tate and Tyson is. So I think Mekhi Lemon plays well along that group. McCarthy is going to have a lot of 3 wide receiver sets compared to what they've done before. So Mekhi Lemon slides in at that slot position. Then at 22, the Chargers are coming up. And I think interior offensive line could be a play. I do like Pregnon a lot. Bisnatis is interesting. I think he's good, but I don't think he's worth 22. So I don't think the Chargers go interior offensive line. I think wide receiver could be interesting just because Trey Harris wasn't super impressive as a rookie. Keenan Allen's obviously very old. Quentin Johnson showed improvements, but still. But I think they end up going defense. And I think they end up going with Peter Woods, interior defensive lineman, to solidify that front. They could go edge or interior, but I think Peter Woods is better than Cassius Howe, TJ Parker, Lee Hunter. Anyways, Peter Woods was a guy that was like a top 3 to 5 pick solidified before the college football season started. Had a down year, but I don't think it was as down as like some people think. He still showed a lot of promise, and I still think he's a very good disruptive player. He has some work he needs to do to become a little more consistent, but I think Peter Woods at 22 is not bad at all. Then you have the Eagles, and I think they are interested in corner because they're keeping Cooper at slot, and they want another opposite corner, boundary corner, but I don't think that's where they go. I think safety is interesting there. I think tight end is interesting there, specifically since Deke is still available. Goddard might be gone, right? And AJ Brown might be gone too. But I think they end up going tackle for the future replacement and injury replacement of Lane Johnson. He's going to retire like any minute now. He's having some injuries. Like I said with the Rams, the best teams prepare for the future, not just in the moment. And I think drafting the Lane Johnson replacement is not a bad thing. I also think, grabbing a guy that could play some guard is interesting too, because Dickerson might retire soon too, even though he's pretty young. But I have the Eagles drafting Monroe Freeling from Georgia. I think he's a guy that he won't start day one, but he doesn't need to start day one. So he'll put on a little more weight. That's probably the biggest concern. But having a year with the strength and conditioning team of a professional football team, not that Georgia's probably as professional as you can get or close to it at the college level, but another year just bulking, getting stronger, working on his technique, working under Lane Johnson and the rest of the offensive line. I know their historic O-line coach is gone, but that team could still develop him extremely well. Then you have the Browns, who we obviously did not pick offensive line first time. We weren't Cornell Tate. So I think they end up going offensive line, no question. And I think that's Spencer Fano. Again, I think his limbs are kind of small. I think he put on a little too much weight on the gut, which makes me worried he won't fill out what you want. But he definitely has some skill. His technique is good. He's very quick. He's very lateral. He doesn't handle the strong pass rushers very well, but it could get better. And he's just one of 2 tackles. He'll continue to work on that offensive line around him. I don't think he's a bad pickup. He's still worthy of a first round for sure. I'm just a little lower on him. So Spencer Fano at pick number 24 for the Browns to fill out that offensive line. Then the Bears at 25. And I think the Bears, interestingly enough, could trade this pick. I think they could be looking at Max Crosby because they need a pass rusher really, really bad. They also need some interior defensive line pretty bad too, right? And those are the only two positions I'm looking at with this pick. Because the thing is, the Bears are looking to win a Super Bowl within the next 2-3 years, right? They have their coach. They have a rookie or a quarterback on a rookie deal. You need some playmakers. Cassius Howell, I'm not big. His metrics are really bad. And I know Bain's metrics were, but I think Bain has the skill set and other strengths that help reduce his weaknesses. Mesidor is kind of the same way. I think Howell, all three of them have bad metrics. I think Howell is the least talented with the bad metrics. So that's why I have him falling. McDonald is really good at run defending, but he doesn't bring much pass rush. So we're going to go TJ Parker out of Clemson, similar to Peter Woods, a guy that was projected really high, had a down year, but he still shows a lot of potential, a lot of upside. He's still young. He has some work to do, but I do think he can get to be a pretty decent pass rusher in this league, or at least a solid edge defender, right? Then looking at the Bills, their run defense was one of the worst in the country last year. So that's kind of where I want to look at for them. I think linebacker is interesting. I think safety is interesting, but I think defensive line, wide receiver is interesting as well, but Boston could be in play. I think Cooper could be in play. Both of the guys would be upgrades, but I think Cooper's a little too similar to Shakir. Boston is interesting, and I think this could also be a pick they look into trading, maybe with the Eagles. If the Eagles want to get rid of A.J. Brown, I'm not making a Brown trade right now. We're going to go defensive line, and we're going to go Lee Hunter. McDonald is the better run defender, but Hunter is also a very good run defender, and he has more pass rushing upside. So I think just based on upside, I go Lee Hunter. He was a beast on that defensive line for Texas Tech. He will be a very good run defender. So Lee Hunter goes to the Bills at number 26. 27 is very interesting. I think they could look into KC Concepcion for the 49ers. He doesn't play the same way as Deebo Samuel, but he has a kind of similar skill set. Very good after the catch, very explosive player, has some drop problems, but they do need a wide receiver. Brandon Ayuk's done there. Juwan Jennings is a free agent. I also think they could have some help on defense, but George Kittle tore his Achilles. Now, from what I heard, his recovery is starting really well. They do think he can make it back for next season, but you don't know how early he'll make it back, and you don't know how well he'll play. I think Sadiq is really interesting because worst case, Kittle comes back and plays really well. You can play 2 tight end sets with Kittle and Sadiq easily, because Sadiq's kind of like a slot receiver versus a tight end. Kittle is more of an inline blocker. Sadiq can help with that. I think he's a little underrated as a blocker. The only question is his lack of production, but I think that was more of an Oregon thing than a Sadiq thing. Best case, or not best case, but like if Kittle doesn't come back well, you have your tight end, Sadiq. So I think Sadiq for the 49ers is an actual really intriguing play right there. Then the Texans, I think they could look to add an explosive running back because Woody Marks was good, but just not exciting. But I don't know if any of these guys are worth that. If Sadiq would have fell one more, I think Sadiq would have been really interesting. And there are still some really good tight ends. Stowers. I really do like Jack Endries, but I don't really think any of them are worth the number 28 pick. I think they go interior defensive line. I think Caden McDonald clogging up the middle, being a stud run defender, allowing those 2 pass rushes just to not worry about it as much. Do that thing. I think Caden McDonald in that interior makes a lot of sense. Then the Rams at 29, they already got their quarterback, right? Like I talked about before, a lot of Rams fans are going to want someone that helps them win now because they are Super Bowl contenders, right? They could go receiver to have that third wide receiver. Devontae Adams is getting old, has some injury problems. I think that makes sense. I also think they could go in the secondary, but their safeties were pretty good last year. I think corner could have some upgrades. They have some free agents along there. And while he's a little smaller than I'd want, I think Avion Terrell is the most ready player on that secondary, right? I do like the upside of Colton Hood better. But again, Rams are trying to win now. I think Avion Terrell makes a lot of sense for them. A little smaller, but he's a good run defender still. He's very feisty, strong. I think he's also a very smart player. So I think Avion Terrell helps boost that secondary to help make a Super Bowl push. Then with the Broncos, I do think linebacker is in play here, specifically probably Jacob Rodriguez or Isaiah Trotter. I do like Golladay and Anthony Hill Jr. too, but to me, the defense was so good. Not that you don't want to make it better, but I think you go offense. And tight end is interesting, but I think Evan Ingram is good enough to hold off on that. They could use a better running game, but I don't think you necessarily need to replace RJ Harvey yet. I think wide receiver, Sutton's getting a little older. He's still very good. Apparently they love Pat Bryant, which I do like Pat Bryant. I don't think he's the kind of receiver that doesn't let you take a first-round guy. But I think Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin aren't good enough either to not take a receiver here. So to me, Omar Cooper Jr. makes a lot of sense. I think Sutton as one big receiver on the outside. Pat Bryant can be another. Mims and Franklin can come in on fourth receiver sets or five receivers. Probably not running five receiver sets, but you know what I'm saying? But I think Amari Cooper Jr. as your new slot receiver, he's so good. He has to be a first round pick. We'll talk about him a lot more in that wide receiver video that I mentioned when I do all my positional rankings. Honestly, he might be my personal third favorite receiver over Lemon. I do think Lemon goes higher, but Omar Cooper Jr. is so good. He has to be in the first round. Then the Patriots, I think they have a couple options. They could go edge rusher, but I don't think Cassius Howe is worth it. Then you're looking at Zion Young. I actually love, Gabe Akis. Apparently you don't pronounce the J. Gabe Akis, I do think he actually could be worth a first round pick, but I don't think he will be a first round pick. But I think the Patriots would love him on that defense. I think he'd fit Mike Vrabel's defense a lot. They're not going to move off of Will Campbell tackle yet. I don't think they should yet either. I'm not in that camp. I do think Moses on that right tackle is replaceable with Caleb Lemieux or Blake Miller, but I think they're going to go guard, right? I think they want to improve that interior offensive line. I think they could move Jared Wilson to center where he was drafted. So I think Emmanuel Pregnon is a really interesting pick here. He could play left guard for you, let Jared Wilson move back to center, and all of a sudden that offensive line, still very young, but a little more natural. So Emmanuel Pregnon goes in at guard right there. Then the Seahawks, I think, is pretty easy. They have Kobe and Tariq are free agents, so they need a corner. I think Brandon Siss and Colton Hood are the two options here, and I almost took Colton Hood a couple slots before this because I think his upside is phenomenal. I think he'll play really well in that Mike McDonald defense. Colton Hood finishes the first round. I will move through round 2 a little faster just so this video isn't too long. So like I said before, if you want to see more detailed aspects on all these players and rankings, look for my positional videos coming in later. So the Jets start round 2, and I think they finally go wide receiver because they got Orville Reese and McCoy, right? So we're going to get Denzel Boston, big wide receiver out of Washington. Then the Cardinals picking at 34, they grabbed Sonny Styles in the first round. So now I think they finally go offensive line and grab Blake Miller out of Clemson. Titans continue to work on defense, getting Ruben Bain first. Now they're going to get a corner, and I think Brandon Cease will be that guy. Could have snuck in the first round as well. Then the Raiders are up. I think they also go corner. I think these two guys are kind of interchangeable. Keith Abney the second will be the next guy off the board. Then the Giants pick next. I think they continue to build around Jackson Dart. They could also add to their secondary, but I think we're going to go wide receiver, and I think KC Concepcion is the next best option, a very dynamic receiver. Needs to work on his catching, but very good after the catch kind of playmaker right there. Then the Texans will build on their offensive line, specifically the interior offensive line, getting Chase Bissonis from Texas A&M. Then the Browns have their third pick of the draft. They already got Spencer Fano. They're building together a really good offensive line here, or a really good offensive draft here, should I say. And I think they continue that by going after another tackle. They could go with both Utah guys, but I think they go with Max out of Arizona State. I think both of these guys that they're grabbing could become 10-year starters on the offensive line, whether it's for the Browns or they move on. I think they could be both NFL starters for a long time. Then the Chiefs, who were mocked a lot to get Jeremiah Love, will be getting his teammate Jedidiah Price to add a more dynamic running back to that group. Then the Bengals continue to add to that defense. They already got Caleb Downs. Now we're going to give them a pass rusher. There's a few guys here. Obviously, Cassius Howe is kind of the main name, but I think R. Mason Thomas is probably the best upside player on this list. I think he can bring some immediate value and a long-term upside too over someone like Howe, who I've already mentioned has a lot of limitations. And then the Saints are on the clock. They already added a running back, and I think they continue to build around Tyler Shuck, make his life easier. And I think they go after his former teammate, Chris Bell, who had his best season with Shuck at Louisville. Then the Dolphins went with best player available, Jordan Tyson, and I don't even hate them continuing this trend. I do like Caleb Lemieux. I like Zion Young, but I think they go Emmanuel McNeil Warren, the safety out of Toledo. This guy's just all over the field when he plays. And then we have the Jets again having their 4th pick of the draft, already grabbing 2 players on defense and a wide receiver in Denzel Boston. And I think they continue going defense. I think this time, though, they get a true middle linebacker versus Reese, who's moving from linebacker to edge. I think we go Jacob Rodriguez. I do think he is worth the high pick. Obviously, some people thought he's maybe only a college kind of a linebacker, but I think his testing was good enough to translate to the NFL. I think he has all the intangibles. I think that's a guy that would fit a culture or help build a culture in New York. I think Rodriguez on the Jets would be wonderful. Then the Ravens are back on the clock, and I think they go wide receiver. I think Jermaine Bernard is interesting, but I think Chris Brazil, the third, I mean, he is 6'5", 200 pounds, really fast. I think he's the kind of weapon that Lamar would really benefit having on that team. Chris Brazil, the third, goes to the Ravens. Now we have the Bucks, who already added with a defensive edge, and I think they go to linebacker now. And there's a few, like I said before, this is a really good linebacker draft. Anthony Hill Jr., Jake Galladay, Deontay Lawson are all really good additions, but I think Oziah Trotter is the next best linebacker on this list. So he goes to the Bucks. Then the Colts are picking with their first pick of the draft, because obviously they traded for Sauce Gardner. And I think they continue a run on linebackers, and they go with the stud out of Texas, Anthony Hill Jr. Was supposed to be a higher pick, didn't have the best year ever, missed some tackles, but athletically, he's experienced, and I think you can, shore up those missed tackles 100%. Up next, we have the Falcons, who are also picking their first pick of the draft, and I think this is where Cassius Howe finally goes. I know this might be one of my hottest takes of him falling this far out of the first round, but I just don't think his upside is worth picking him high. But the Falcons are a team that needs some edge rushers. James Pierce has the legal problems now. I haven't really heard much about it, but it's hard to imagine he's going to get away with that scot-free. I think corner would be interesting too. But we're going to go Cassius Howe, edge rusher out of Texas A&M, going to the Falcons. Then we have the Vikings, who they were able to solidify that back end of the defense with Dylan Thyman. So now we're going to go running back for them to add another weapon. Aaron Jones is getting very old. Jordan Mason is just not that good of a guy. I think Jonah Coleman in the second round is pretty good value. Adds a lot more explosiveness. He's a good pass blocker as well. Then the Lions are up next, and I think they could either go edge or they go corner. They already addressed the guard position. I know their corner room is already pretty good, but you never hate having extra depth there. And I think someone like D'Angelo Pons, even though he's really undersized, the athletic ability and just the fierceness he plays just fits perfectly on this Lions defense. I think they would love to add a guy like that to their room, 100%. Then you have the Panthers, who they grabbed Keldrick Folk in the first round. I think they continue to address their defense, and I think they would probably go linebacker here. With the next best one, I would say, is Deontay Lawson for sure. Then the Packers having their first pick after trading for Micah Parsons. I think they actually made out pretty good here, because they're going to get Christian Miller out of Georgia to kind of replace what Kenny Clark was, that run stuffing interior lineman. Just eats up the size as well. Then with the Steelers, I think they go secondary. They already addressed wide receiver. They could go someone like Caleb Lemieux, even an edge rusher for the potential TJ Watt replacement. But I think Keontae Scott, the corner out of Miami, kind of fits everything that they need to play opposite Joey Porter Jr., especially if James Pierre leaves, but even if he comes back, just having that extra corner never hurts. Then the Eagles up. I almost went Sadiq in round one, but we ended up going tackle. So now they are going to get a tight end to replace Goddard, whether it's this year or next. I think Eli Stallers. I don't think he's that much worse than Sadiq. I think they're kind of in the same tier. I think Stowers is an athletic monster. He's basically a wide receiver and a big body like Sadiq. Need to work on his blocking, but it could be a lot worse. Then the Chargers are going to address that interior offensive line finally. I think Sam Hike, the center out of Kansas State, is probably the best true center out of this group. I do like Jake Slaughter a lot. Connor Liu's good as well, but I think Sam Hike is the number one center off the board. And I think this is the kind of range where there's no stud centers, but he's good enough to fit the back end of the second round. Then the Jaguars, they also didn't have their first overall pick after the trade with the Browns. Honestly, I think Kyle Lewis, I know he's poor PFF, this is kind of high for him, but he had a monster Senior Bowl. He looked amazing, very athletic, very good coverage linebacker, and I think he can plug in into certain schemes pretty well for a Chicago team that doesn't have a ton of holes on that team. I think Chicago could also go safety here, but I do think that Kyle Lewis is probably the best out of these two groups right here. Then the 49ers will take an edge rusher to really solidify that defense, really help out getting some sacks to get after the quarterback. I think Zion Young out of Missouri is the next best up. Gabe Akis is probably the second choice, but I lean Zion Young a little bit. And then with the Texans, they will also, similar to the Chargers, address that interior offensive line by grabbing another center. Jake Slaughter is my second center off the board to the Texans. Then the Bills are up next, and we picked Lee Hunter, the defensive lineman out of Texas Tech, to go there. I think they could go linebacker. I think they could go edge. I think Gabe Akis here is really intriguing. And he kind of played a little bit of linebacker in college, but I think he translates really well to an edge. Big guy, 6'3", 270 though. Big, strong hands. I think he translates really well to an edge. And he adds a little bit more dynamic ability for that pass rush for the Bills. Then the Rams are up next. I think they could go wide receiver here, to be honest. Devontae Adams is getting a little older. You know, sooner or later you have to kind of find his next replacements. I think Antonio Williams is really interesting, but I think Jermaine Bernard is probably the best receiver on this board. I think he's not going to be a superstar by any means, but I think he adds just a really solid presence to that wide receiver room. And when you have Puka, you don't have to have a second superstar. Obviously with Adams, it's nice, but you don't have to. Then the Broncos are up next on this board, and I think they continue to address the offensive side of the football. Their defense is so good that, yes, they need a couple additions, but I think they could address those in free agency pretty well. I think they go tight end, and I think Michael Trigg kind of fits their scheme the best at the tight end position. I think that's kind of what Sean Payton would look for in a tight end. And I think he complements Evan Ingram in two tight end sets pretty well as well. Finishing off the second round, two teams that were in the Super Bowl, Patriots. I think they either go Caleb Lemieux or Caleb Tiernan for that potential right tackle replacement after taking a guard in the first round, or they go Derek Moore to improve their pass rushing. I think Derek Moore is probably the move. I think just knowing Mike Vrabel, he won't want to pass on defense twice. And then the Seahawks are on the board. We already gave him Colton Hood. I think Caleb Lemieux is a possibility. I think Caleb Tiernan is a possibility, but I think they actually go double corner here, knowing how much Mike Macdonald loves corners, how well he uses them, and having two key free agents. I think Chris Johnson, kind of like what the Eagles did a couple years ago, going double corner, two guys that can't play together, or if one just ends up being better than the other, at least you know you nailed on one of them. So that's the end of the second round and end of this mock draft. Let me know what you guys think. Which picks were terrible? Which picks do you love? What do you want your team to do in the comments? And if you can like it, I appreciate it a lot. And like I said, we're going to come out with those player top 10 or more than 10 top player positional rankings for each positional group, and more mock drafts in the future before we get to the draft and get back to college football as a focus.